Vold and Christian Calgi, senior political correspondent at the Daily Express. Very good morning to both of you. Lovely to see you both. And so much to talk about. It's going to be a very big week for the Prime Minister, and that's reflected on lots of the front pages. Zoe, take us to the Sunday Times. Their headline is "Insecure Peace Risks More War." And this seems to be the message that the government is pulling together ahead of Starmer's trip to Washington.
That's right. So Starmer has made some assertions to Zelensky that he is obviously going to try and promote Ukraine's interest in his conversations with Washington this week. He reiterated that Ukraine must be at the heart of any negotiations. And obviously this comes after really fractured relationship between the US and Ukraine, which seemed to deteriorate very quickly this week, including reports that US negotiators threatened to cut off Ukraine's access to Starlink satellites unless it agreed to a deal giving away critical mineral rights. So we can see the pressure really ramping up on Zelensky. Starmer's promise to back Ukraine. This article also talks about Peter Mandelson's role as the Washington ambassador. So he's drawing up plans for a new economic partnership between the US and the UK to hopefully keep some of those relations as positive as possible. But he's also pushing the Prime Minister to commit to a timeline for that 2.5% GDP defence spend. At the minute, it's 2.3%, and there's no timeline for scaling up. But of course, that is a big ask from Donald Trump and Washington. They want to see all the European states commit to more defence spending. Otherwise, there's always the risk that the US will pull out of NATO.
Yeah, and that's really how the Sunday Telegraph frames it, this push for a boost to defence. That's their front page story, isn't it? And you get this real sense that Keir Starmer is trying to balance. I'm going in with a tough message, you need to back Ukraine, but here are the sweeteners. I am going to boost the amount of money coming and a few other things that hopefully Donald Trump will look more favourably on.
Yeah, exactly. That's a good way of putting it. So there are two big things that Keir Starmer's going in on. One is, back Ukraine, calm down, mate. And the other one is we will spend more on defence. So the Sunday Telegraph is looking specifically at Britain's defence spending. Obviously, Keir Starmer yet to spell out when or how we're going to get to that 2.5%, and also making the case that many people in defence are now saying 2.5% is the minimum to just stand still. Actually, we need 3%. So they're talking actually that we might need to bring forward the date by which we hit 2.5. At the moment, it's set to be 2030. Former Defence Secretary Ben Wallace is saying 2028.
Well, they haven't actually set the date, have they? The Tories had set the date, hadn't they? And they were saying we'll do it when we can afford it.
Yes.
But the suggestion is that even if they match what the Tories had promised, it may not be soon enough.
It's not going to be enough. And, I think Trump's comments on Ukraine over the past week have been deplorable, but I also think that he is right that Europe have been freeloading on America's defence spending for too long. I think it's a good thing that he's making Europe wake up and take this issue more seriously. So, yes, we're waiting on the outcome of the defence review before we find out precisely what Labour is going to do, but also the Telegraph carries words from Rachel Reeves saying that the government is absolutely committed to go beyond 2.5%. So it seems now there is this groundswell of a move to increase defence spending in Britain.
Yeah, but there's also that sense, that message as well, that Starmer apparently will take to Donald Trump, that they still want America to act as a guarantee, that Starmer will commit to more defence spending and encourage his European partners to do the same, but that the US also needs to be part of a plan to deter President Putin in future.
That's right. So one of the quotes in this from a British official is that there needs to be a kind of tripwire in Ukraine, that if Russia triggers it, European forces, and crucially the US backing those European forces as well, will stop Russia from going any further. Because, of course, the worry is that if Ukraine does concede land or resources to Russia, there's nothing stopping them from coming back for more. So absolutely, I think everybody, Europe and Britain see the importance of getting Donald Trump and the kind of power and the resources behind the US to back any deal that's made. But of course, that deal needs to be something that suits them and suits the Ukrainian people. And I think, any conceding of land or resources will worry them because they fear it will only strengthen Putin.
And what about the defence spending? I mean, it's one thing to promise that you're going to reach that higher level by a later date, but it's another thing finding the money, and where is that money going to come from when Rachel Reeves has got very tight constraints around her?
Yes, and there are some who are saying that Rachel Reeves should change her fiscal rules in order to allow us to borrow the money, but I don't know how the markets would react to that. There's also an interesting line in the Sunday Telegraph saying that President Macron is considering actually doubling France's defence spending to 5%, which would then which I know Donald Trump has floated before, but I don't see Britain in any position at the moment to be able to afford something like that. Obviously, there are areas we can make cuts. Rachel Reeves, the Treasury, has asked departments to model cut 11% as a worst-case scenario, those that aren't protected, which I'm not entirely sure is what Labour voters really voted for last July. It's a really difficult thing. Obviously, there are cuts to welfare that all governments are now looking at. But yeah, it's a really, really tricky thing. And it's you know, one does wonder whether the government may have been slightly relieved had Biden won the election, because I don't know if this debate would be front page material had he.
Yeah, I mean, it's a huge problem for Rachel Reeves, isn't it? I noticed that Kemi Badenoch in the Sunday Express is suggesting slashing foreign aid budgets and welfare as well. I think she also talks about giving up the Chagos deal and saving a bit of cash there. But this is a real problem, isn't it, for Rachel Reeves, who has said to people, you know, I want to make sure you feel better off. You've got more money in your pockets.
Absolutely, yeah, and I mean, not least because defence should be seen in in part of the realm, which it also includes strengthening public services domestically. So it's very hard to argue that you have, the adequate defence preparations in place if you don't have strong local authorities, if you don't have protections within the NHS, say if there was a cyber attack, if you aren't investing in your national critical infrastructure, if you aren't investing in your homegrown energy. All those things also require money. If those things don't have money, then you can't say you are a state that takes defence seriously. It has to be domestic as well as international. And I think that is going to be the criticism levied against Labour. If they do increase defence spending but cut, as Calgie was saying, other budgets, I think that would really cause concern, because all these other ministers, cabinet ministers, would be asking, how am I going to protect my own department, and how are we going to ensure we have that strong nation that has enough money and feels better off to ensure that they feel that domestic security has been taken seriously as well as their global security? Ben
Wallace has also made the point previously, and I think he's right too, that for too long governments have sort of prioritised public sector services and the welfare state and cut defence in order to fund those things in a way that we don't have that mindset when it comes to NHS spending. We've got to flip that and put defence first and not keep dipping into that pot in order to fund short-term election-friendly giveaways. We've got to be more long-term and more strong about all of this. Yeah,
so lots of pressure on the government at the moment and a key week ahead. So let's take a look at The Observer, their main story. That subject, but there's another story on the front page that took your interest, which is here, revenge porn abusers get to keep images after conviction, which sounds extraordinary.
It is extraordinary. So this seems to be a kind of systematic failure of courts to impose orders to ensure that perpetrators of revenge porn are deleting and forcibly having these images that they have taken or that they have accessed removed from their devices. So even though someone can serve a conviction for having for perpetrating revenge porn, there doesn't seem to have been orders in place in a number of cases to ensure that they no longer have access to that porn and it's no longer on their devices. But there's also a failure of prosecutors to actually ask for this order to be put in place. So it might be a case of this being a fairly new law. There is still some teething practices around, making sure that victims are continually protected, even after the case is concluded. But it is extraordinary. And I think if you were somebody who had been a victim of this and you realised that actually there had been no measures taken to ensure that the perpetrator had removed or deleted the images, you'd be very, very worried. So I think this is actually a pretty big scandal, really, for lots of people who have been subject to this crime.
Yeah, which is a really horrible crime in the first place, isn't it? So that is quite an interesting read. Take us to the front page of the Mail on Sunday next, Christian. And this, they say, come out, it's the thought police. Talk us through exactly what the story is.
So we've got another failure of the justice system here. What has happened is a lady in Greater Manchester called Helen Jones went to social media to demand the resignation of local councillors in relation to the Mail on Sunday's previous expose of this WhatsApp group that saw a minister and an MP lose the whip and get suspended. They were making lots of jokes and many people found them distasteful. So she takes to Facebook, I think it was, and demanded that one of the councillors resigns. That is it. She wasn't being personally abusive. She wasn't making threats. She was saying, is he going to resign?
Yeah,
It's not looking good.
And several of them, but you're
several
right,
of them.
that was
So
the theme
then
of it,
Greater
yeah.
Manchester Police turn up at her door and basically, you know, accuse her of breaking the law. Or now they've walked back from that and say she's committed no crime. And she's saying she's been silenced by the officers and they're being compared to the Stasi and the Thought Police. I mean, it's absolutely extraordinary. They turned up at her door within 48 hours of a complaint being made. I don't think anyone in Greater Manchester thinks they get that sort of service from the police if they'd been robbed, if something genuinely serious had happened. This is an area of the country with one of the highest crime rates. They failed to solve 3 out of 4 shoplifting incidents. And the reason I think police are falling into this trap is, I made this point before, when I was at sixth form, we had a teacher who used the phrase bourgeois sense of productivity to describe something like reorganising your ring binder and highlighting notes, because it made you feel productive without you actually being productive. And I think the problem is for the police that dealing with non-crime hate incidents is really easy. And if they go and deal with them, they get to make it look like their crime-solving rate is better than it is without doing much work.
Do you think that's right? I mean, are there real problems around these non-hate crime, what's it called? No, non-crime hate incidents. That's right. Do you think there is a problem? Very briefly.
Well, I think you know, we saw, I mean, in this case, it does seem extraordinary because I can't see in anything she would have said that I think should have triggered a police response. So clearly there is an issue here. I think more broadly, you know, this was talked about a lot during the summer riots, and clearly in those cases people were inciting violence. There's a different thing. But in this case, yes, I have to say it seems quite extraordinary.
OK, well, Zoe and Christian, we're out of time this hour, but luckily you're back next hour for another go. But thanks for now.
Weeknights on Sky News.
This is your chance.